Well now, a huge welcome to you to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is my fourth book in the series, and this is called The Phoenix and the Creatures of Darkness. Now I want to emphasise that this is a novel, and only a novel. Yes, it is based on real people, even some celebrities, and real events. But I need to apologise to you if you feel you've identified yourself, because that was never my intention. The intention is for this simply to be a novel, an entertainment for Diafol Mountain. Pak Karno had told me that my mother was not willing to move on until she was convinced that I was happy. I really couldn't understand why. I was expected to be happy that my mother was about to die. But when I got home, I realised that she was holding on to life until she was convinced that my life was happy. Indeed, when speaking to her on the phone, she'd regularly asked me if I was happy in Indonesia. Now, I find such questions difficult. My life has not worked out as I had planned. I'm effectively denied work in Indonesia, and as a result have a much more frugal and certainly less active lifestyle than I'm used to. Then there's the racist abuse that I still endure. But I live in one of the most beautiful parts of a wonderful country and am married to my soulmate. I found happiness comes from within and not filling your life with consumption and entertainment. Or could it be that my mother knew something I am yet to discover, or even something about my mother that I'm yet to accept? One clings to life, although there is nothing to be called life. Another clings to death, although there is nothing to be called death. In reality, there is nothing to be born. Consequently, there is nothing to perish. Buddha. My mother's concerns suggest that she's not actually a narcissist, although could be high on the narcissism scale. That my mother and I have a strong telepathic link suggests that she is an empath after all. Certainly I've always known about my mother's psychic abilities, but not until now never considered this to be empathy. Have I therefore got my mother all wrong? Well, not necessarily. Both my father and I have suffered from a degree of narcissistic abuse. But my mother should certainly not be banded together with my ex-partner. In fact, I owe my mother a huge apology for having painted her in such a bad life. It's true we always argue and that she does seem to goad me to lose my temper. But I should take some responsibility for this. And maybe there is as much a reflection of our telepathic connection as true mischief. Sorry, Mum, I love you. I spoke with Pak Karno about love, revenge and people who acted badly. He did not share the conclusions I could come to people merely being avatars in a universe not of their creation. Nor did I mention my view that these were souls of those who had been placed in hell. But he did say that somebody who was bad would not change, which of course is a description of the psychopath and probably the narcissist. But I wonder if Pak Karno is influenced by his Catholic views of heaven and hell, good and evil, God and the devil, whilst I'm much more clearly moving towards a more Buddhist view of karma, whilst not dispensing with my Muslim submission and observance. Although just maybe we're talking about the same thing, but using such different language and metaphors that it seems as though we hold completely opposing views. My father told me that some people are playing roles, and I have speculated that these are, or certainly include, those whom we call psychopaths and narcissists. Of course they cannot change, or at least not within the universe we observe them. So the difference with Pak Karno is that I have not explained my many universes theory, which he may or may not agree with. I have found it often expedient to describe things in a fixed materialist universe, as to talk of many regularly changing universes without a timeline is a step too far for many people. Is it possible that Pak Karno is using the same expediency that I do? Thus I returned once more to my father's comments that they were playing a game. Now I cannot believe that I will one day change my opinion on my ex-partner, but I already have on my mother, or maybe I should on Branwell. I've always seen Branwell as a victim, but maybe I have been too quick in writing him off as irredeemable. Certainly my mother never has. In fact, the whole world has written off my son. His mother has, his mental health team have, and in every respect the welfare state has. A week later, a tarot reading on YouTube seemed to sum up Branwell. It reassured me that he really did love me and was genuinely sorry for all he had done. But it also said that he was too immature to change. Now, could this be that he is aware that he defrauded me, maybe at his mother's bequest? It went on that I should forget about him, because any recollection would only repeat the experiences I'd already suffered. I know this to be true, and that there is nothing I can currently do for him. But he is my son. Or is he? Maybe if I can move on and enjoy success once more, I would be best placed to help him. We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark, but the real tragedy in life is when men are afraid of the light. Plato. A few days later, another YouTube tarot reading confirmed much of this, but also said that Branwell was addicted to something, which I've always suspected, and he's unable to change. Yet another suggested that I had to let Branwell grow by himself, and that he was broken and needed to sort himself out. The suggestion is that Branwell doesn't love himself, and until he does, I'm powerless to help him. Both tarot readings and my heart tell me that he is codependent on his mother, and she is holding on to him to keep him from approaching me. This is something in my heart I've always known, but is so difficult to do as someone who has at least felt he was a father and an empath. Another YouTube channel reminded me that I should submit to Allah and stop attempting to take control of my environment. The sad truth is that, like everyone else, I've become addicted to YouTube tarot sites. Currently, my forecasts are very positive, and I've been clinging on to them, that my trajectory is about to change dramatically. I'm also using them as a crutch for my own feelings. I will not give up on my tarot, but all my addictions are to be avoided, and whilst I may be, and hopefully envisage a better world, I have become somewhat obsessive. Not long after this, I received a message from Patrick that he'll be sorting himself out and will send me some money shortly. So yes, I have to allow others to sort themselves out, to stop trying to control everything. Not everybody will sort themselves out, and some will make no attempt to repay me. But for many, things will work out, if only I leave the universe to return to balance. But when Madde became affected by all around her expressing negative thoughts and their worries, she confided that she was fearful of losing her mind once more, the very same energy my mother has had ever since her own sister was committed to a mental asylum. I speculate if all of these problems I have faced have been my mother's energy attempting to bring me back to her, to love her as she's always wanted me to have me all to herself. Is that why I fell for a psychopath? Why Muir lost his mind, and why I've struggled in Indonesia? Because my mother wants me at her side? I have always felt that my mother did all she could to break my relationship, like the troubles she caused when Madde was there, but never really considered this to be the paranormal. But then again, why did I feel these things when many of my mother's actions were of a mundane nature? Despite these concerns, I have to say that if we feel lighter at our home in Gurunkedal than we ever have before, yes, there are major changes in our emotions, especially as I keep discovering more through the dark night of the soul. but there isn't the underlying paranormal activity, which we had become so used to. I know a good many of you have either been doubting my sanity, or at least thinking that I make up some of these instalments, and that now I truly have gone too far. Well, when I explained all this to Maddie, it made perfect sense to her as well, especially as my mother regularly comes to her and speaks to her. We laughed at how Pak Karno may have met his match with my mother, a woman with far more power than any of the Dukans on our mountain, but who does not believe in magic, nor have any idea how to use it. In particular, she only knows how to express her will and worry, and has no clue of the real damage she is doing. I'd spoken to my father, and whilst he refused to speak ill of my mother, he hung his head in shame that I'd worked out what he never had when he was alive. Maddie reminded me of my mother, and had come to her when she'd lost her mind, how she even became my mother and would speak in perfect English to all around who understood little of what she was saying, how she told me that she was from Bournemouth, which made no sense at all. I then wondered if she actually meant Barmouth, which actually made a little more sense, as Barmouth and Fairbourne are popular with people from Salop, including my family. And as a child, and it is possible, if not probable, that I would have an ancestor from Barmouth. I showed Maddie pictures of Barmouth and Fairbourne, and she immediately recognised them from her dreams, claiming that she regularly walked along the Avon Malvac estuary. Maddie went on to remind us that she had said that I was originally from Gununkeedle and owned a huge herd of cows. Now, Gununkeedle could be confused with the Stiperstones, and yes, some ancestors would have owned cows. We also recalled how every Dukan and Ustad we had visited had such difficulty in identifying and ridding Maddie of the spells, with many saying they were Chinese or foreign. What if the magic was the magic of Britain's cunning folk? Wouldn't this explain so much? And now I'm not suggesting that Pa Erte Omuni, Pa Angabaya and the Dukan brother-in-law were engaging in mischief, but that the weren't engaging in mischief, but that the overriding mischief was coming from my mother and her ancestors. Indeed, as I am really beginning to understand the paranormal, this is exactly how it works, how overall trajectories are made up of many individual actions from a variety of actors, making the true problems opaque. Then our worst attack, when we believed we would die, occurred in the Egret Hotel in Manchester, despite it being widely believed that Javanese magic could not cross the ocean with such a large amount of salt. Whilst we both felt that we would die, the overwhelming response was a sudden and inexplicable desire to get away from each other, a desire which keeps coming back right now, suddenly, fleetingly and incomprehensibly, a desire which I've always believed my mother to hold. Why does my mother simply want to own me? Does she want to pass on her possession to me before she dies? Or does she want to confess her secret to me before she dies, believing I can help? When I once did try to help, she pushed me away, claiming that I was doing nonsense, but it clearly frightened her of what I was doing, as are people who are possessed during an exorcism. Maybe the true karma relates to paranormal activities of my Salopian ancestors. I've always believed that my mother to have some powers just as I and Maddie do. Could they come from my ancestors? The Stiperstones is not unlike where I now live in Gununkeedle. It's highly likely that in the past it was a centre of hedgerow magic, and that some would have strayed to the darker elements, including maybe my ancestors. Certainly the Stiperstones is one of those areas where serfs settled, after the Black Death, fleeing their servitude, and became a refuge for dissenters, accumulating in the Lord's Hill Chapel, holding an equivocal status of being neither coveted by England nor Wales. It is highly likely that the traditional arts, including the darker aspects, were, and maybe still are, well represented there. The cunning folk of Mary Webb, as a defence against the powers of the manor and the state. As one descends the Stiperstones to the south through a haze of Ganga, the town of Bishop's Castle is visible, where there can be no doubt that some of the inhabitants engage in the traditional arts. Then, again, I had written, but edited out, a humorous section in a previous episode about coming across a witches' coven nearby to Snail Beach, and events at the Mary Webb School. More sinisterly, the Left-Handed Path, Order of the Nine Angels, with its links to the far right, is purported to have been established in Shropshire. I believe in the areas around the Stiperstones. Certainly the original leader, David Myatt, had lived in different parts of Shropshire, including Church Stretton, over the years, and the one-time leader, Richard Malt, lived in Lidbury North, to the south of Bishop's Castle. One of the Order of the Nine Angels publications by Anton Long, a pen name probably for David Myatt, is called Diafol Quartet, and it is reputed to contain encouragement for satanic ritual abuse and human sacrifice. Just possibly this is the reason for the high incidence of animal mutilations reported in South Shropshire. Do not mistake these people for the spinster with purple hair and a large number of cats who burn sage around their home. These are the people who feed the background of many apocrypha. Snail Beach, where my cousin lives, has been a mining community since the Romans, but in the Victorian era, along with the nearby bog mines, they were in full commercial production, exporting around the world, and this is where my grandfather Joss worked, and then at the Groshing Plant after they closed. Stripped to the waist in the summertime, hooded with coarse sacking in the winter, when outside with bleak winds whistling around them, they worked amidst many a hazard, and found their pleasure in drink, cockfighting, the wake, the fair, and the races. The women had a pinching time, where money went in wild living, and many children had to go in the mines to work, where morals, actions, and language were obscene and filthy. Sam Hughes, a Shropshire miner, he was actually accusing Cornish and Montgomeryshire migrants of this lewd behaviour, despite Montgomeryshire only being 9 kilometres away. Just as Indonesians still blame all crime on foreigners, especially Malaysians with whom they share a border. However, during the Norman harrying of the north, the rebel Wild Edric and his men were banished to the mines. It is said that their tapping can still be heard at times of conflict, including the Napoleonic Wars, the Boer War, the Crimea War, the First World War, as they are awaiting release to deal with national threats. Indeed, Edric and his fairy bride, Lady Godda, and his army, the Wild Hunt, were spotted in Plock's Green at the start of World War I. Maybe this was the reason wilder mines were used for rituals by the Order of the Nine Angels. Now, could this be why I'm being urged to focus on my heritage rather than that of my adopted home? Even more so the reason I know that I have to close off some energies to embrace new. That Londos have a magical tradition will come as a shock to most Indonesians, probably no more so than Pak Karno. Is this the reason why everyone has missed the obvious reason for all my misfortune? That nobody could believe that the karma of black magic was following me to my home and influencing events in Indonesia, a country in which black magic is still commonplace. Is this the revelation of the Dark Night of the Soul, that my Uncle Norman, the Wizard of Liverpool, was far less influential in impacting the events that have affected my life than unknown farmers on a barren mountain range straddling England and Wales? I say unknown, but shortly after writing this, I was reminded of my Uncle George, who lived below the Bromlow Callow, immortalised in the Hollywood adaptation of Mary Webb's Gone to Earth. I only met him once, and even in the 1960s, he still wore a fob watch, gaiters, and supported a General Kitchener moustache. I have no reason to suspect Uncle George, whom I'm told was a kind man. Indeed, he gave me $10 when $10 was a fortune. But there was something special about the Callow, not unlike the nearby Devil's Chair, Diafol Mountain. Furthermore, I kept being told to trust my intuition. It was cold on the Callow, a spiny of silver beeches and larches that topped the hill. Mary Webb Gone to Earth. As I say, there's no reason to suspect Uncle George of anything other than hill farming and a penchant for Edwardian clothing. It took a little research for me to come across a local legend. It is said that during times of famine, a fairy gave a magic cow that provided an endless supply of milk. On one night, an evil witch milked her into a sieve, and the cow disappeared. The witch then turned to stone, and the circle was put around it to ensure that she would not escape. This stone circle is Mitchell's Fold, less than 6 kilometres south-west of George's farm, on a route which passes the Giant's Grave. But then again, there's the Devil's Chair just over 4 kilometres to the southeast, and a further 4 kilometres in that direction. A boulder is said to be from a stone cast from the Devil's Shoe, which does a complete turn once a century, and close by the grave of Richard Munslow, the last known sin-eater in England. Personally, I write off the local legend that witches sup with the devil at his chair every Halloween as apocryphal created by the established church, not least as there is some elements of a tolerance towards cunning folk in Shropshire, when in eastern England they were persecuted. "It's raining over the Devil's Chair now," said Deborah, on the highest point of the bare opposite ridge, now curtained in the driving storm cloud, towered in gigantic aloofness of massed quartzite, blackened and hardened by uncountable ages. In the plain of this pile of rock would have constituted a hill in itself. The scattered rocks, the ragged holy breaks on the lower slopes, were like small carved lions beside the black marble steps of the surreptitious throne. Nothing ever altered its look. Dawn quickened over its pearl and emerald. Summer sent the armies of heather to its very foot. Snow rested there as doves nest in cliffs. It remained inviolable, taciturn, evil. Mary Webb, the Golden Arrow. Through meditation, it was suggested to me that the karma involved the false accusation of somebody possibly related to stealing corn. The victim was hung for the supposed offence. I also kept bumping into Branwell during my meditations, who seemed amazed that I was willing to forgive him and indeed embrace him. I explained there was little can do for him until he'd learned to love himself, but I'll try. My father backed me up, and as we walked down the mountain from the temple, hand in hand. Later we found Branwell's mother in the inner temple, who lunged at Branwell, attempted to bite him. But I offered her my neck instead, just as I had previously in meditation when Branwell lunged at me. And again, that Kundalini-type experience of bliss running through my body. What should I make of this experience? Could it be that I'm releasing something from my subconscious, something that is holding me back, or does it have a deeper meaning? For some 10 years, my mother has hardly got out of bed, complaining of a variety of medical conditions which medical science struggles to identify. She claims that she no longer wants to live and is contemplating suicide, but seems too frightened to die. In a previous episode, I refused to disclose a dark secret about when I was leaving the UK and my father broke his arm. My mother left him on the floor of the lounge for 4 hours, refusing to call the ambulance, as though she wanted him dead. Of course, had my father died, I have had to cancel my plans to move to Indonesia to take care of my mother. Was that the real motivation? My mother has been a Methodist all her life, but now tells me there is no God, and that when we die there is nothing. Are these not indicative of somebody who is possessed, and whatever the truth, somebody who believes they are possessed by the devil himself? That this should have influenced my life so dramatically, and Branwell so tragically, should come as no surprise, as such karma lasts for 7 generations. Why am I now drawn to Mary Webb? Well, I've always loved Mary Webb, who seems to me to be a Salopian Thomas Hardy, but only recently has she re-entered my thoughts. My mother also has loved Mary Webb, and one of the few books my mother keeps is Byford Jones W., Shropshire Haunts of Mary Webb. Later it occurred to me that I was focusing on my maternal grandfather's family, as I knew nothing about my maternal grandmother, or Nana as I called her. She was purported to be originally from Sale, and was illegitimate, so sent to Salop to avoid the dishonour. Sale was then an affluent commuter town for Manchester, so it's fair to assume that at least one of her parents was affluent. Maybe the karma simply relates to Nana's conception, and I need look no further. Certainly, I really haven't received any more messages about the Stiperstones connection, despite having fleetingly felt this to be important. This also made me realise that I'd only considered my paternal grandfather's family. My paternal grandmother's family were farmers in Ulster, all called Billy, including the women. Now, the history of Ulster and its plantations is not without incidents and bad karma. From this side of the family, it's entirely possible, if only for taking the land of Catholics. I think what I'm suggesting is that both Maddie and I pick on my mother's anguish, and neither of us really know what it is, not least as neither of us would understand any explanation my mother would willingly proffer. So both of us confused by that and what is happening to us. Maddie knew that black magic was being used against us by our Muni and probably others, and so interpreting her strange feelings as the effects of black magic. After all, that is her upbringing. This was all new to me, and in trying to understand my wife, I too interpreted this as black magic, whilst not having the same background as my wife. You may find it hard to swallow, but add into this mix the liberal ingestion of lead and lead acetate from Pa and Gabaya and others. The neurotoxicity caused non-traumatic brain injury, leaving us with lifelong inability to cope with stress, and keeping emotions at appropriate levels requires a lot of effort. It has also made us highly susceptible to suggestion, unable to focus, and cognitive disability. So you could choose to see this as paranormal, if you choose to see telepathy over thousands of miles as paranormal. But I simply see it as a function of consciousness that science is yet to acknowledge, although maybe it's hinted at through quantum entanglement, and especially in resonant energy transfer. Now, I'm not discounting the paranormal, as it's important in providing security in areas where science offers none. Looking towards paranormal or other religious explanations for that which science cannot explain is only natural, and an important function of our consciousness, which in terms of some will prove to be valid. Man is lost and wandering in a jungle where real values have no meaning. Real values have meaning to man only when he steps onto the spiritual path, a path where negative emotions have no use. Sai Baba. So maybe you, dear reader, are right that I've taken this all far too far to believe that my mother is behind my problems. Has Pak Karno got it all wrong about my mother's influence? Or have I simply taken what he has said too far? As I have said, I'm experiencing the dark night of the soul. So of course I'm very emotional, and of course I'm prone to taking things too far as I search for the truth. Indeed, it is not much more likely that my psychopathic ex-partner and or Branwell are behind some of the chronicle of misfortunes that have beset me. Now, I could quite believe that either would use black magic to harm me and Maddie, but maybe the truth is that Maddie and I are empaths, and we're aware that something is wrong, but could not understand exactly what. Some tarot readers have suggested that my ex-partner is using black magic against me, especially blood magic. Again, this is something I must consider. Indeed, could it be that the real reason why everyone we sought help from was unable to understand what was happening because it was from an unfamiliar tradition? That the universe was trying to warn me of the jealousy, major deceptions and scams coming from those who I saw as my family in Manchester by sending me deception and scams in Indonesia. You see, when a psychopath selects their target, there's no escape for the target other than death. Just as I have argued, Omuni sees his Pasugian pledge against us. Indeed, it's becoming increasingly apparent that black magic within Indonesia is an attempt to explain those things we explain by psychology in the West, both explanations being somewhat partial and flawed. Of course, this simply adds to a conclusion that I made long ago, that psychology was indeed magic stripped of context and devoted to servicing greed. In fact, I've been receiving messages about just how toxic my ex-partner is, and I have to conclude that this probably also means Branwell, that she has nothing whatsoever to offer a relationship and is intent on taking everything from anyone she chooses, like the spoilt child that she was. Certainly in tarot readings it has been suggested that she is under the influence of the devil, and despite having concluded that Satan is a metaphor, I cannot say that I find this ridiculous. During our time together, she did everything she possibly could to destroy me in every way, and when I left Manchester I was like a zombie. Or as she commented as she threw me out of my own home, that she had been initially attracted to my optimism, but now it had all gone. I'd always felt that Maddie was my soulmate and that we'd been together before, but I kept getting messages that Branwell and his mother were also a part of a past life, and this was a karmic relationship. When I last saw Branwell, he told me that his mother was obsessing about me, and now I'm getting many messages to suggest this is true. While she publicly calling it love, her real feeling is, how dare he replace me? Is this responsible for the strong emotions that I now feel, and not from my mother, as Pak Karno believes? Indeed, one tarot reading suggested that she's about to kill herself and leave a note blaming me, a final act of vindictive control, and I really can believe this. Nor are the problems that I've experienced since Manchester related to the psychopathic manipulation and control I suffered as an empath, a control that I'm still learning to escape from. Maddie, as a fellow empath, would have picked up on my anguish, mixed with signals that some around us were jealous and plotting against us, resulted in the tragic events of nearly 4 years ago. Certainly it would explain the resilience and persistence of our problems. In addition, these flu-like symptoms that I get so often, but only last one night, are typical of the stress-related response psychic empaths get when they pick up on something. So once again, what can be explained by the paranormal also has a partially scientific explanation. But earlier in this episode, I mentioned that maybe empaths and narcissists need each other to balance their personalities. Just maybe I needed to experience the psychopathic abuse from my ex-partner to push me into my supernova, for without it I would not have experienced the dark night of the soul and the light. So was this part of me resolving those childhood traumas and a necessary part of my development as an empath? I have repeatedly talked about me being on a mission and speculating that it was to find a way of dealing with narcissists, not simply for me, but a part of my desire to help everyone. Of course, this is far too egotistic. I only have a mission to resolve my childhood traumas, to become whole so that I can begin my journey on finding God. About a month after writing this, I began to develop a very different theory about consciousness in the universe. What if there are not many universes, but a single universe, and that universe is exclusive to us? In other words, we each have a different universe. So we influence the thoughts of others, and this is how we have a shared experience. This would mean that magic is about changing our beliefs, and therefore our universe, whereas black magic is about changing the beliefs of others, and therefore their universes. The beauty of this theory is that I can define education and media as black magic, as it influences our beliefs. Taking this idea further, we only disclose to others those elements of our universe which we believe will have some relevance to the experience of others, as it would not label us as mad. This would explain why even most of the materialist scientists will privately admit to having some paranormal experiences. Maybe they rationalise these through science, but they do indeed have these private experiences. But what if there are not additional universes containing the paranormal, and that the paranormal forms a greater or lesser part of our exclusive universe, depending on our beliefs? So there is nothing strange nor external about the paranormal. It's simply those parts of our consciousness which we don't normally share. Indeed, it's those parts of our consciousness which the black magic of education and media has told us do not exist. I noticed that one of our trees was growing very tall, but somewhat lopsided and in danger of falling over. So I resolved to do a little tree surgery, but could not reach the top of the tree with the ladder and the tools I had. And I climbed down the ladder. My Dukan brother grabbed the shears and started clipping the base of the tree, as though he was doing topiary. I was nearly brought to tears. I was wanting to balance the tree, not make it look different from its sister on the other side of the door, especially not as it was going to stop growing for the dry season. I should add that happened only a few days after his wife had brought me to tears. She began to weed our top garden, and was about to plant peanuts. But this part of the garden is infected with peanut parasite, and I wanted it to lay fallow for a year, and after research found it needed to be 3. I think the Dukan family had planned to take over our top garden, as brother number 3 had taken over the bottom garden. The main reason for taking over the bottom garden was to prevent the erosion, which had resulted in costly and repeated repairs to the restraining rod. We'd paid him a little, but not a lot. Nevertheless, the return in produce sales, or even produce, did not cover what we had paid out. The Dukan's family were clearly jealous of what they assumed to be our relationship and wanted their share of the perceived scam, regardless of what was in our garden's best interest. But in common with narcissists, Indonesians rarely consider the needs of others, and the Dukan of his family believed that they were being treated unfairly by us, ignoring that they'd already defrauded me out of the greatest amount of my life savings. Imagine somebody stole your car and crashes it, and when you find out, they are demanding that you pay their hospital bills. Well, that is the Indonesian mentality. About a week after this event, an elderly neighbour came to visit us with gifts of beans and rice from a garden. This is typical of the tradition where we live. People share their surplus with neighbours, as the value of most produce at the market is hardly worth the walk. Maddie always reciprocates with something from her garden, or most often some cakes or puddings that she had made. But this elderly lady admitted that she was frightened to be seen leaving our home with gifts, in case the Dukan and his family spotted her. This comes as no surprise, that we had been marked as his property, and that people are reluctant to befriend us, as it would incur his wrath. So without our knowledge, we'd been sent to the Tangerang Banten, along with the Duke and brother, and only those brave enough to stand up to him dare befriend us. But then this is not unlike how Budde and Maspredipta had briefly established themselves as upstanding members of the community, using my garden, its produce, and my contributions to good causes as though they were theirs. And Maddie became busy and very happy during Ramadan. Uni had been selling cakes and snacks from her home and via a store in the village, and asked Maddie to help her. Whilst the money Maddie made was minimal, she was selling her produce, which made her happy. However, it would seem that her best friend Yanni was jealous of Maddie, who stopped selling her produce and taking to the store in the village. This really upset Maddie, making her cry, just as the actions of the postmaster from Woonasari had really upset me. In both cases, this was not a living, just a hobby, a pastime that gave us a pleasure. But the jealousy which permeates Indonesia had taken these simple pleasures from us, that Indonesians are less concerned about becoming wealthy as ensuring all around them have less than them. Once again, I was reminded of the deep-rooted economic problems facing Indonesia. For how can a country develop when its population do their best to sabotage the endeavours of others? In this respect, at least, Indonesia truly is a nation of narcissists. Maddie was so upset that she wanted to return to Jakarta to live, which certainly during this health crisis is the last thing I want to do. Why would I opt to give up my freedom to live under the restrictions and psychological abuse that the rest of you have to endure? As an empath, I realise that I find the emotions of a big city overpowering, especially those that I find negative. Not least as we're both empaths, living up a mountain with nature was a part of our recovery, and whilst we're much better, I have no desire to test this. I'm happy here in the mountains and really do not want to return to Jakarta, at least at all, let alone to live. But I need to think of Maddie, and she misses her girls terribly. So once, or should I say if, the health crisis ends, reluctantly I must accept Jakarta as my home. Maybe, however, there is more to this than I'm acknowledging. Maddie crying is a strong indication that she's not fully recovered, as when I met her, Maddie would never cry. Could it be that Maddie was also suffering from narcissistic abuse by her ex-husband Prama? This would mean that Maddie's breakdown was her releasing the years of abuse she had endured, and just as I had experienced the dark night of the soul. For both of us to fully heal, we need to forgive and forget our pasts and confront our demons, and maybe this means moving back to Jakarta for both of us. Our lives have been stymied for the last 4 years. We can only allow new cycles into our lives by releasing the past, and yes, maybe that includes moving to Jakarta. Although Maddie agreed with me we would not find what we wanted in Jakarta and find ourselves in limbo between the mountains and the sea. 2 days later, Maddie was cooking iftar meal for the masjid. When I questioned her about it, she told me that this was something she did every Ramadan, even when in Jakarta. I asked her who'd asked her to do this, and she replied, Allah. It would seem that this is something Maddie does every Ramadan, anonymously and without fuss, so terribly un-Indonesian, although they do give more of their income to charity than any other nation, but rarely without leaving a clue to their anonymity, and highlighting why I love my wife so much. Well, that concludes this chapter from my 4th book, The Phoenix and the Creatures of Darkness, and it's actually the final in this series of books. I'm not saying I won't write another book, but I feel this series is now complete. I really hoped you enjoyed it. And now I'm going to add a new chapter every week to this book. So if you want to hear about it, subscribe and hit the bell. Now, I'm not doing particularly well with these eBay, YouTube algorithms. So if you could hit the like button and make some comments, I think it helps me. I hate to ask you for this. I hate it when I hear people coming out with this sort of statement. But the truth is that this has been like a full-time job for the last 4 years of my life. And I'm still a long way off from receiving any money whatsoever for it. So I really do need to, I suppose, beg you. Subscribe, like, make comments. And thank you very much. Thanks.